We can just kind of line by line go through this and just so I don't miss anything. And,
This is really geared for direct to seller contracts, right? So usually if you're offering on market properties, you get the luxury of having a realtor complete this for you.
Yeah.
So whether it's a listing agent, you have another buyer's agent representing you, they're going to complete the contracts for you. That's one of the benefits of offering on market properties. So, this contract is great for direct to seller negotiations and wholesaling.
Yeah.
So
I'll market like anything on like the MLS and like Redfin.
exactly,
Right.
the multiple listing service, Redfin, Zillow, Realtor.com, anything listed on the local MLS,
Right,
listed
okay.
by a real estate agent.
Yeah.
These are those are on market properties. So anything like direct to seller that's not listed on the MLS, where you might be door knocking, or you might have a friend or family who's looking to sell their house, then you could always put this use this contract with them directly. If you're not sure how to use like a real estate realtor approved contract.
Yeah. So just to clarify, they're filling this out, not me.
So if you're going to be using this contract, you'd be filling this out. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
You'd want to fill this out when you're working directly with the seller.
Okay.
So
Got it. Okay.
yeah, the seller definitely wouldn't be filling this out. You want to act with authority. You want to act with intelligence and confidence when filling this out, when you're working with a seller. What I meant is that when you're pursuing a property that's listed with a real estate agent, you're going to want to use one of the realtor contracts.
Right. Okay.
So
Got it.
and a lot of times the real estate agents will actually fill it out for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'm filling this out.
Yeah.
When it's the seller and myself, which is pretty common, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I guess walk me through it. Forgive me if I stop you for any questions.
Let's just start at the top. There's a notice that just is a little bit of a disclosure. Number one is where you want to list the parties to the agreement. So the seller, the name of the seller, and keep in mind that there might be multiple sellers involved in a deal, right? If there's husband and wife, if there's multiple family members, it's very important to get all of the sellers who own the property on this agreement. Because if one party is not on here and their signature's not on here, then your contract might be completely invalid, right? It's going to be
Pro
worthless.
tip, everyone.
Yeah,
All the sellers.
Make sure you talk to a title company, do a little bit of research online. You can find who is on title to the property. It might be an LLC, it might be a company, it might be a trust. So regardless, you want to make sure you have the full and complete name of the owners of the property on the purchase agreement, and you get all of the appropriate signatures.
Got it.
There's a line for, social security number, tax ID. So that's optional, just if you want to make sure you have the correct selling information, as well as the mailing address, right? The residence address of the sellers is where you can put right here, not the address of the property in section number 1. Following that is the buyer's information. So if you're the one who's buying the property, you would put your name here or your company name here. That's where that would go next to buyer. There's also an important line right underneath that, which says, buyer's name and his, her, or their entities, successors, and or assigns. So this clause essentially allows you to assign the contract without any resistance, without any question. And like I said earlier, all contracts are assignable by default. However, having this in here, just make sure there's no question. Like, it's very clear as day that, you're the buyer on the contract. However, it might be your assignee that is going to ultimately be the buyer. So whoever you might designate to be the assignee of this contract is also the buyer, and the seller is agreeing to that.
Got it. So the buyer line's myself and my cash buyer, technically.
You would just put your name here, you as the buyer.
Okay.
The line underneath just gives you a really explicit right to either assign it to somebody else, or you might change the name to a different LLC.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So
I see.
if you have a successor, right, like if you passed away when you're under contract,
Yeah.
right, your successor would now have the right to this contract.
Got it. Okay.
Or your or assigns, right? So it's basically, Tim and or whoever you assign the contract to.
Got it.
And this generally doesn't come up a lot, but if the seller ever questions it then you would just say, hey, we have multiple LLCs. I'm not sure which entity we want to take title in. It might be my trust. It might be my, my rehab entity. It might be my rental LLC. So depending on what strategy we decide to use, then we're going to just close in a certain LLC. We haven't decided on that yet, so that's why that's in here.
Right. Okay.
So very, very common thing that can occur. Next is the address. So this is the address of the buyers. So this is, if you have a mailing address, you would just want to put that here. You don't always have to put this in contracts to make them enforceable. It's just to be very clear as to who are the parties on this contract, and then ultimately how to get in touch with these individuals, the mailing address of those. Under that's just another disclosure, just stating the intention behind the contract as well between the buyer and the seller, that they are agreeing to this deal under the price and terms in this contract. Number 2 is the real property to be purchased. So this is something that you want to make sure is completely accurate. This is the subject property. This is the property that you're looking to purchase and wholesale using this wholesale real estate contract. So here you just put your street address, city or town, county, state, zip, and 2C is described as. So what does that mean? That's where you put your property identification number, PIN number, or your assessor's parcel number, APN. So what is that? That is essentially the tax ID for the property itself. So in every municipality, in every county, there's a county assessor's office, which is the organization that levies property taxes. And so they assign a specific unique number to each parcel so that they can keep track of it for the sake of real estate transactions, for property tax assessments, for property listings as well. If a real estate agent's going to list a property, they can type in the APN into the tax system, into the listing system, and then it'll automatically populate a lot of the property information. So you would want to just put your the property's APN, which you can simply look up on the county website.
Oh, okay.
You can look up the tax information, or you can also look it up on Redfin, Zillow, the MLS.
Okay.
It's pretty easy to find.
I was about to ask how to get that and how long would it take if I need to go to a person, but if everything's online, then that's great.
Yeah,
nice.
Very easy to find.
Yeah.
It's right on the Redfin listing.
Awesome.
That you can find within seconds of looking up a property. Yeah. So number 3 is included in sales price. So this is essentially stating that everything on this piece of land that's permanently attached to the land, right, including the structure itself, right, the house that you're looking to wholesale and purchase, as well as everything that's considered permanently affixed to the property, like the flooring, the walls, the roof, the air conditioning, the furnace, the landscaping, mailbox, the pool and spa equipment, all the carpet, etc. So it's basically all real property is included in the purchase price.
Right.
So there's a difference between real property and personal property. So personal property is basically everything that you can remove readily that's not permanently
your couch
attached.
and
Exactly, yeah.
yeah.
Furniture would be personal property.
Yeah.
Anything that's in storage, obviously cars,
Yeah.
things like that. So those can also be negotiated in the sale. They would just have to be listed in the next section, which says additional personal property, if any, to be included. That's where you could list things like, hey, I really love that motorcycle. Let's include that in the sale.
And he's yeah, sure.
Yeah, or furniture, right? So you might be buying a property that you want to Airbnb. Then you might want to have it furnished when you buy it, or you really like a chandelier that's already on the property. So sometimes you can specify certain things, as well as appliances. So that's what you also want to specify as well. Here it's in that section, it says built-in appliances, but a lot of times owners are attached to their refrigerator, right? They might have splurged on a really nice refrigerator. Yeah. So it's good to specify what of that personal property that you'd like to have included.
I actually didn't know you could do that. So real property is just basically everything that's on the lot that you can't physically remove with your hands unless you're Superman or something, And then personal property is your furniture, personal belongings, mementos, things like that. Got it. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so there's a list here, pretty specifically. So for example, some sellers might want to remove their curtain rods and their drapery, right? So they might specify that that is excluded here.
Got it. Okay.
And then the next line, there's no leased property, no leased personal property except. So if there's anything that's leased that's not specified, you would just include that there. So a little bit less commonly used there. So section 4 is really important. This is the purchase price. So one of the most important elements to purchase agreement is the purchase price. So you'd simply put the price there, and then the next lines is really how that purchase price will break down as far as when that amount is being paid. Mm-hmm. Now, so lines 4A and B are essentially the earnest money deposit. So when you form a contract, you're going to want to include an earnest money deposit. That might be as low as, $500, $1,000. Sometimes it's as much as, 1 to 3% of the purchase price, or maybe even the entire purchase price, right? So 4A would be if you're submitting the earnest money, the initial deposit with the purchase contract, you would put that amount there. I never really do that. More common that I see is 4B, where you'd say it says purchase price is payable as follows by additional deposit due upon seller's acceptance. So that just means if and when the seller accepts the purchase agreement, so when they sign and they accept it, that's when you're going to be paying this initial deposit.
Got it.
So that's more common with these contracts. So I would forget 4A, and then 4B is where you'd put your earnest money deposit. And then 4C is if you're going to be getting a loan, any kind of financing involved in the purchase, you would put that loan amount in 4C. So if you're putting, 80% as a loan, 20% down, then you could put the 80% of the purchase price on that line as kind of like your financed amount. But again, if you're offering all cash, which most wholesalers are going to be offering with cash, you wouldn't have to put anything on that line. 4D is if you're going to be taking ownership of the project of the property subject to the seller's existing financing, subject to deal of approximately however much that loan balance is. So if the seller owed, $50,000 and you wanted to take over the property subject to the existing financing, you would just put that approximate amount on that line, stating that I'm using that to contribute to the overall purchase price. Mm-hmm. Now, 4E is where you can state cash. So there's a line there. It says, 4E by, I would just put in big capital letters cash. So you really just emphasize that this is a cash deal. This is not a finance transaction. Again, one of the benefits of working with wholesalers, with real estate investors, that we offer all cash deals. So in most cases, you would just basically put the entire purchase price minus whatever you put as your deposit on that line on 4E. So you do cash, and then whatever that is not in your earnest money deposit, you would put it there. And then balance to be paid by certified check or bank check at closing. So if there's anything remaining, then you would go ahead and put that there. And then finally, at the end, you just put the purchase price again. So it should all equal up to that purchase price.
Right, okay.
Once you filled that out.
Yeah. So 4 just by itself, purchase price, and then everything kind of broken down as to what that purchase price is, and then finally, again, the purchase price and total price to be paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just breaking down how's that purchase price going to be funded at the end of the day. It's regarding your funding of the deal. So again, one of the benefits of working with investors is it is all cash. There's no financing in place because that can cause some complications. If the buyer doesn't get approved for that financing, then that could risk the deal. It could allow them to back out and not close. So Section 5 really just concerns the deposits that we stated above. So it's just basically stating that the deposits should be given to the listing broker or an attorney, a title company, or an escrow company. So one thing that's very important is you do not want to give your earnest money deposit directly to the seller. So you're going to want to have a title company facilitate this transaction, facilitate the closing of this wholesale deal. And so they're going to handle all the funds. Money shouldn't exchange directly to the seller in most cases, right? Yeah. You can do a deal like that, but it's just it makes people more comfortable, and there's a neutral third party involved facilitating this contract. So this really just states that the deposit should be paid to a title company or someone else who's a third party, not directly to the seller in general. It also states that if the buyer does not submit that deposit, it gives the seller cancellation rights. So you can't just tie up a contract and just not put in the deposit. It allows the seller the right to give you a notice that says, hey, you didn't submit your deposit. I'm going to now cancel after 3 days if you don't submit this deposit.
Got it. I'm going to pause the contract for a second. Are there any other instances where a seller would want to cancel? I mean, that's a pretty big one. It's like, oh, you don't have the money, theoretically.
Yeah.
So like what kind of things should I look out for to make sure they don't cancel, I guess?
Yeah, there are instances where a seller could cancel. I mean, I had a deal like a few weeks ago that the seller pulled out at closing. So we were we were about to close and make $15,000 as an assignment fee, and the seller just got cold feet and didn't want to sell.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we could have gone forward and we could have enforced the contract and we could have enforced what's called specific performance, which states that, hey, we can now hold the seller liable to uphold their end of the agreement. Because we were completely non-contingent in the deal. We had money on the line at risk and we were ready to close, and they were holding up their side of the deal. So their lender wasn't providing the right payoff information to the title company. So the title company didn't know how much to pay the lender and how much to pay the seller once we paid the purchase price. So it was on their end, the seller was delaying and their side of the transaction. So we could have taken action and actually like closed the deal. But we like to do the right thing. We like to act with integrity.
Yeah.
We don't want to force anyone to do anything. That's just not how we run our business. I think other wholesalers might have taken legal action to close the deal, but we're just like, hey, like, we have a reputation to uphold. Reputation's everything to us, at least. So
it's just the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. So we're just like, all right, well, we're going to cancel.
Right.
So it was just because they got cold feet, and a lot of times we are dealing with distressed sellers who aren't very like organized and who don't really understand real estate transactions. And like it's a very big decision, like buying and selling a house is like one of the most important decisions, and has very big financial consequences. And you're honestly moving your entire life. So sellers can get cold feet. I would say is like probably one of the biggest reasons why they might want to cancel. It is possible that they get higher offers later too. They might have other people sending offers, and they could get a higher offer later, and so they might get cold feet as a result of that. So.
The more offers you send, the closer you are to the deal, right?
Absolutely. So getting back to
I think
the deposits.
line 6 now?
Yeah. So 6, again, if you're offering all cash, then you can pretty much cross out item 6. So this is your financing contingency. If you did want to make your offer contingent on obtaining a loan, then you can actually specify the amount of that loan in this section, the maximum initial interest rate, meaning what's the most that this loan can actually charge me as far as the interest rate, and as well as the terms. So really just the terms of the financing, that if me as the buyer, if I cannot get a loan that at least meets or exceed these terms, then I can cancel the agreement. So, so again, this is an opportunity. Most people who are going to be using this contract are not going to need this financing contingency. So it's a great opportunity to cross this out and explain to the seller the strength of your offer being cash and saying, hey, you don't have to worry about me not obtaining this loan and not having the ability to qualify for a loan to buy this property. It's also not contingent on getting an appraisal of the property. So I'm not going to get an appraisal on this property. It's not a contingency of this agreement. So again, contingencies are just ways that a buyer can back out of a contract. They can terminate the agreement if that contingency is not met, and it just strengthens the offer the less contingencies you have in that contract.
Right.
So 6 really just concerns that contingency. You can read some of the details there as far as what it means, and 7 is the condition of the premises. This is simply a disclosure just saying, hey, the buyer has examined the property, they're satisfied
with the physical condition subject to the inspection contingency. So this is not the inspection contingency.
Right.
That's coming afterwards, which is one of the most important things that we as wholesalers, we as investors, really just any prudent individual buying a piece of real estate is going to want to have in their contract is an inspection contingency. So
This is the big thing that protects us, right? I remember Alex mentioning that, because if it's like kind of, and high level what I think it is, if it's not up to standard, if the property isn't up to standard, to our standards, we can back out now of this.
Correct.
Because we inspected it, it's like, hey, there's actually like no second floor. It's like it got blown away with a tornado or something, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of like big picture. So the inspection contingency, it's basically saying, hey, when we enter this agreement, let's say you're the buyer, I'm the seller, we agree to do this deal. You typically haven't taken the time to look at every system of the property. You haven't looked at the furnace, the air conditioning, the roof. You haven't crawled underneath the house and looked at the crawl space and the foundation. You really to make sure there aren't any significant defects of this property that can significantly impact the value. So we're entering this deal, kind of on a surface level, saying, hey, I love the location, I love the characteristics of this property, everything I've seen so far, I'm willing to move forward with it, but I need to do a more thorough inspection to make sure that this isn't gonna, completely have me lose my investment, right? There's no like cracked slab and compromised framing in this property that is gonna cause a huge expense down the road, which could completely destroy the buyer financially.
Right.
So the inspection gives the buyer the right to actually go in really as many times as they need, as within reason, to inspect all the systems of the property, to do walkthroughs of the property, and to make sure that they are satisfied with the physical condition of the property before they're formally and officially committed to buying the property.
Right.
So what this does, it effectively makes your deposit on this deal, your earnest money deposit, it's refundable until you remove all your contingencies. So as wholesalers, right, entering a real estate wholesale contract, this is an important thing to protect your earnest money deposit, because your cash buyers, like someone's going to want to inspect the property before they're formally committed to it.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to make sure you have as long as you can possibly negotiate to inspect the property, because that's your protection of your earnest money. It protects you, and it gives you more of an opportunity to now, market the property, to find the right buyer for the property, and to really show it to prospective end buyers.
Yeah.
So it's not only, serves as the physical inspection, which is really what it's mainly for, but it's also an opportunity for you to shop the deal around to potential cash buyers, to end buyers for your contract.
Yeah.
So that
You're kind of gathering all the information as you're inspecting it, finding the exact perfect buyer for it. Would it be kind of common, and is it even possible then for the cash buyer to kind of do this part, do the inspection on your behalf? Like, say you have a really good relationship, you guys work together all the time. It's like, hey, like I got the property in XYZ LA. Like, can you just go see it for me? Like, is that totally legal, totally doable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the thing I love about this particular contract too is that it's very explicit that you as the buyer can now have your designees inspect the property, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it's very specifically stating that anyone that I designate to go do this inspection, whether it's a partner, whether it's a contractor, whether it's an actual home inspector or not, anyone that I designate can go do an inspection on this property. So yeah, great question, absolutely. Especially when we're wholesaling in other states and doing this at a distance, we'll have somebody else go check out the property, and typically it's our cash buyer.
Right.
It's someone who's actually interested in being the end buyer of this property. We'll arrange that they go and inspect the property. They'll usually do one walkthrough, and they're able to make a decision after that walkthrough.
Yeah.
So
I imagine they really want to, if they're going to be the ones kind of making the investment to purchase it and resell it, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, we'll vet them up front and just make sure, hey, does this deal numbers-wise work for you? Obviously subject to your walkthrough. but you like the property, you like the price, just do some vetting, make sure that they're serious before you actually get them to the property. But again, yeah, this inspection we often use it as the time for our buyers to go through, and based on their walkthrough, they can give us a non-contingent commitment to buying the property. So you're generally going to want to assign this contract or secure your end buyer within your inspection contingency. So this is very important, because otherwise you're pretty much locked into the deal.
Right.
And if you don't close it, then your earnest money is going to be at risk, and you might have even more of a risk if you don't have a great contract like what we have here.
Right.
So yeah, this is very important in contingency. And so, I mean, I'll just go over really quick because it is a very important thing, and I want to make sure you understand and everyone else understands what this actually means in practice. So 8A of the inspection contingency just means that the inspections shall be completed and results reported to seller on or before 5 p.m. on a given date. So this sets your time frame for your inspection contingency, your inspection period of your real estate wholesale contract. So let's say we enter the contract on January 1st. You might write, January 14th as the completion date for your inspection. So that effectively gives you a 14-day inspection period, which would allow you to investigate the property, determine whether you're satisfied with the condition of the property, right? Learn things about the property that you might have not known otherwise, and then also shop the deal to your buyers, get your cash buyers inside of the property, and then secure your commitment by one of your cash buyers during that period. So 8A is really setting that deadline to complete your inspections. 8B is saying that the seller agrees to permit buyer's designees to inspect the real property during the period from seller's acceptance until the date set forth in 8A above. If buyer is not satisfied with the physical condition of the real property and so notifies seller in writing prior to the date specified in A above, then buyer may, at buyer's option, terminate this agreement. So that is one of the most important lines here to protect you as a wholesaler, and that gives you the right to terminate the agreement and no risk involved. You get your earnest money deposit back, and you can walk away from this contract as if it never happened. Of course, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to get the experience, which is absolutely worth something. But this is super important, which is why I want everyone to really study this and download this, highlight this section, because this is your protection and why it should make you feel comfortable entering in contracts like this.
I can see why it's so important now. I've actually never read it line by line, and it actually really is something, pro tip, that everybody needs to have. Awesome, yeah, thank you. So 14 days, usually, right, from the time of closing. Seller allows anybody, including myself or my cash buyer, to see it on said day. And then after it's signed, we basically have 2 weeks to inspect and back out if needed.
That's if you negotiate a 14-day inspection. So that was just one example. You can make it as short or as long as is negotiable. So it benefits the buyer to have the inspection period all the way up to the date of closing, right? So that means you can back out all the way up to the date of closing, but it benefits the seller to have no inspection period at all, which means the buyer's accepting it as is with being locked in from day zero, right? So it's usually going to land somewhere in between, right? It's usually never, sometimes it's non-contingent. Sometimes it might be all the way till closing, but it's usually somewhere in between. So if you want to strengthen your offer, you want to have a shorter inspection period. But if you want to have more freedom, more flexibility, more protection, you want to have a longer inspection period. So yeah, you might want to start with like 14 days. If that's too long, then you can always just start to diminish it. Typically we'll shoot for at least like 5 days. So at least that gives us a full business week to take a look at the property, shop it around, and that's plenty of time to really find a buyer and get the deal wholesaled.
Got it. Cool.
So just moving on again, because this is really important to really understand. It says buyer may give seller the option to correct the conditions that are unsatisfactory to the buyer. Should buyer elect to terminate this agreement or seller is unwilling to correct any unsatisfactory conditions, the buyer shall notify seller on or before 5 p.m. on this date of buyer's election to terminate this agreement And if terminated, this agreement shall be null and void, and any deposit monies paid hereunder shall be returned immediately to buyer, and neither buyer nor seller shall have any claims against each other under the terms of this agreement. So basically, it just gives the opportunity for the seller to correct any deficiencies. However, it does give a lot of leeway to the buyer to just terminate the contract and ultimately walk away from the deal. So if you still wanted the property, but you want it subject to some repairs, you have the opportunity to ask the seller to correct them. Usually investors don't do that. They'll either say, hey, take it or leave it. You might ask for a price reduction. This is another opportunity if you discover a lot of things of the property that you don't like that impact the value. Maybe your rehab cost just doubled because you discovered a foundation problem, or maybe some of the framing has been damaged by a hurricane and you need to completely replace a section of the house. So this is also an opportunity to renegotiate with the seller and get a better price for the same property because of the results of your inspection.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So if you're, let's just say, I know a lot of new wholesalers, a lot of amateur wholesalers, they'll lock up properties at way too high of a price, just excited about getting a deal under contract, just saying, hey, I got something under contract. But then the price is too high and your cash buyers are saying, hey, like I need it for $50K less than what you have it.
Yeah.
So this is also your opportunity to go in, do your inspection, and then come to the seller with a case as to why you want to have a better price for the property, right? Maybe you reviewed the deal in more detail. You have all of these things that the property requires in order to sell for top dollar that wasn't disclosed by the seller to begin with.
Right.
So now you can really build a case as to why the property needs to sell for a lower price to make sense for you as an investor, for your business model. And so again, it's another opportunity to renegotiate and get a better price so that it works for your buyers, it works for you as a wholesaler, and hopefully it works for the seller.
Yeah, that's nice. You're not backing out. You're just kind of being like, oh, that's not really like worth the price that we originally had. Let's try to work out something else, right?
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's like the agreement, you enter it, it's like a little bit surface level. The inspection is really where the rubber meets the road, where you as the buyer, you get the opportunity to put the property under a microscope and really determine what kind of repairs are needed. If you're going to be fixing and flipping the property, you're going to want to get your contractors in there. You're going to want to develop a scope of work. This is what your cash buyers are probably doing at this time too, understanding like how much is it really going to cost to rehab this property. So 8C is if you're going to be waiving your right to an inspection, then you would initial here to waive your inspection contingency. So sometimes if we're really certain that we're going to be buying a property, whether it's going to be a wholesale, fix and flip, or rental, then we might even waive the inspection contingency, right? Just to really strengthen the offer and get it accepted by the seller. It gives the seller certainty that we're going to close, that our earnest money is non-refundable day one. So if you really want to send a strong signal to a seller that you're sure about closing and you're not playing any games, then you could waive your inspection. I wouldn't recommend this to any first timer. So I wouldn't recommend you waiving your inspection for all the reasons we just talked about.
Yeah.
But that's in there in case someone wants to really make a statement and show the seller that there's very few ways that the buyer can actually walk away from this agreement.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. So yeah, number 9, it's just the lead-based paint disclosure. This has been required for a very long time. It's really just letting people know that some properties have lead-based paint, which can be toxic. And so just so people know it's in there, nothing that you need to do there. Number 10 is important. It's the occupancy, possession, and closing date. So when is this deal going to close? Right. So you might enter a contract on January 1st. When is this transaction going to settle? When is the closing date? So that would be specified here, as well as stating that the buyer shall be receiving possession and occupancy with keys on closing date. So this just means that the seller can't hang out for a week after you close, right? So a lot of times sellers will want to stay in properties after you close so that they get the money and then they can figure out, hey, where am I moving next? But this states that the property is going to be delivered vacant. It's going to be, occupancy is going to be transferring possessions transferring to the buyer at closing, and that it should be delivered in broom clean condition, free of debris. I mean, you'd be surprised how messy some properties are that we'll get at closing. And it says buyers should have the right to a walkthrough inspection of the property within 48 hours prior to the closing date. So to your point earlier, you mentioned, hey, there might be a hurricane or like a flood that comes through the property. This just makes sure that, from the date that you sign this contract, right until the day of closing, that the property hasn't, caught fire or the roof hasn't been blown off by a hurricane and it's flooded. So you want to make sure that it is in the same condition as when you went under contract.
Yeah.
So this just gives you, the buyer, the right to another walkthrough within 48 hours prior to the closing date to make sure that it's still in decent shape.
Yeah.
It's also an opportunity to state the title and escrow company that's going to be handling the transaction. So you might want to choose an investor-friendly title company for your wholesale contract, for your wholesale deal. So if you have a company that you want to specify, you can go ahead and put that here so that there's no question. If you don't yet have your title company or escrow company or attorney selected, then you could just simply say buyer's choice in that space, so that once you have the executed agreement, it's now your choice who you want to go to. So that's one way that you could complete that section if you're
But it's always kind of recommended to use one of those things, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So it is important to understand if your state, wherever you're going to be doing the real estate transaction, wherever the property is located, if attorneys are closing these wholesale deals, if a title company is the sole party who's handling the transaction, or if it's a combination of title and escrow. Like in California, for example, it's a title company and an escrow company. In states like, Chicago or like Illinois, right? I've done a lot of deals in Chicago. It's handled by attorneys. In Colorado, for example, we just closed some deals in Colorado. It's only a title company. So it's important for wholesalers, before entering into real estate contracts or doing deals, just understand what are the local customs. Talk to people in your market, understand who handles the closings, and so that you can start to create some connections and get some referrals so that you can specify an investor-friendly attorney, investor-friendly title company to put on the contract ahead of time. Yeah.
So me, let's just say I want to wholesale something in San Diego. How would I kind of go about finding a good title? Is there one you recommend? A good title company?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends really. Again, like where the deal is going to be. Are you asking like for a specific title company or just like how to go about
let's just say
one?
like I'm like, hey Ryan, like I got this deal like under contract. Like I come to you tomorrow and it's let's just say here San Diego, like La Jolla or something. Like,
there's a handful that I've worked with in the past. I know Chicago Title is like a national company. That's
so there's national ones.
Really,
that's cool.
There's national title companies that have branches all over the country. So there's Chicago Title. There's Western Resources Title. There's Fidelity National Title.
Yeah. It's pretty easy to find, I guess.
Yeah, there's Tightcore Title. There's Lawyers Title. There's tons of title companies.
Yeah.
So there's a plethora. There's so many options to choose from.
Yeah.
But I would recommend, talk to other wholesalers. Talk to a mentor in your area. Talk to investors in your area, just to understand, hey, who would you recommend working with for this type of transaction? Who responds well? Who's on top of things? Who does good work?
Yeah.
So it's a people business. So a lot of times you're just going to want to work with people that like and trust, or who've been referred to you.
Yeah. Thankfully, there's a community here that's very active and very, very helpful. Who can kind of help me, throughout this whole thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Anywhere that you're looking to do deals, we've probably worked with a company there, or we know people who are doing deals there who could point you in the right direction. Yeah.
Nice, awesome. All right, so where did we leave off? Line.
Yeah, we're on 11. So we're going through the whole thing. So I think it's important, again, using these contracts just to at least know at a high level. 11 is just basically saying that you're receiving title to the property as a warranty deed. So essentially it's just a way that a seller can convey ownership to their property. There's different types of ownership involved, so I wouldn't even worry about this section. You're just gonna, this basically says that the seller's gonna be transferring full and, unconditional title to you as the buyer. It's not like a lease. It's not a leasehold interest. It's not a partial interest. It's just, they're transferring the deed, which is the ownership interest of the property, to you as the buyer at closing. It also says that the seller doesn't warrant or has no knowledge of any outstanding violations or any clouds or encumbrances on title that could impact their ability to transfer the title to the buyer. So that kind of goes into the next section, marketable title. So you might hear this term in wholesale contracts and just real estate contracts in general. We always recommend including a clause like this in any of your real estate wholesale contracts, or whatever you're doing in real estate. If you're buying a piece of property, you want to make sure that the seller delivers free and clear marketable title, which ultimately means that it's not encumbered by any kind of liens, back taxes, code violations, tax liens, or loans, mechanics liens.
Yeah.
So like a contractor who files a lien on the property, like these things need to be cleared by the seller before you take over the property. So you as the buyer, you don't want to take over a property that has a bunch of different liens on it that you now have to pay. These are essentially financial obligations that are tied to the title of the property, to the ownership. So it needs to be marketable, or else the buyer can actually cancel the contract. So this actually in effect acts as another contractual contingency in the contract. So normally, most of the time, sellers are able to deliver marketable title. They're able to clear the liens. They're able to transfer the property. They're going to pay off their mortgage, pay off the taxes, pay off the utilities, anything that other people might own. They might have a family member who lien the property to pay for expenses, whatever that might be. The seller needs to clear all those. And so the property transfers to the buyer just clean and clear. So if they're unable to do that, if they can't satisfy those liens, then the buyer has the right to walk away, receive their earnest money deposit back, and cancel the agreement. Or they might agree to take it over, right? You could always renegotiate the price at that point, right? You could always get creative. So it gives the buyer the right to walk away or figure out a way forward, is what this really means.
Got it.
So it's almost like a title contingency.
Yeah.
So number 13 is regarding adjustments and prorations. So simply put, there are property taxes that are being paid on the property. There are utility bills. There are potentially rents being collected on the property. So there's money being paid, and there might be income coming in, which normally is billed monthly, right? Rent is paid monthly. Utility bills are paid monthly. But when you close on a property in the middle of the month, then you're going to need to prorate that amount so that either the buyer is going to have to pay for whatever they're taking over, right? If they buy it on the 15th of the month, then they'll have to pay from the 15th to the end of the month of whatever bills are in question. So it's essentially just prorating down to the day of how much property taxes that the seller owes and how much that the buyer owes, as well as any other types of interest on the property, assessments, things like that. So it just lists a number of different types of expenses as well that will be prorated at closing depending on when you actually close. So you might notice, like, if you close on one day as opposed to another, your closing costs might fluctuate depending on the actual close date because of some of these fees, right? Because every day that goes on, the seller or the owner of the property is paying utilities, taxes, insurance, all of these things. So depending on when you close, you're either going to pay more or less of that depending on what date of the month that you're closing on.
Got it.
Yeah, and same goes with rents, right? If you're buying a tenanted property, you're going to receive so much of the rent that's already been paid for that month. And so yeah, it's just going to be stating that it's prorated down to the day. It also says that the security deposits as well from tenants are going to be transferred to the buyer or credited to the buyer at closing. So if you have tenants, they have the right to their security deposits. So now the buyer is going to be receiving those and is now responsible for those deposits. So that's really what this 13 paragraph is all about. So 14 is buyer's default. So paragraph 14 in our wholesale contract is buyer's default. This is super important for everyone to really understand what it means, no matter what contract you're using to wholesale. Is you need to understand what happens if you don't perform on the wholesale contract, right? What if you enter the contract and you just walk away and go to Hawaii and just forget about it, right? There are consequences, and this is what it talks about here. So basically it just says that if buyer fails to comply with any of the terms in the agreements and as well as the timelines, and if the seller is not in default, then the seller shall be entitled to all initial and additional deposits provided for in Section 4. So this is that initial deposit, the earnest money. And so it basically gives the seller the right to keep that deposit if the buyer doesn't perform on the contract. And there's an important term in here called liquidated damages. So it says, seller shall be entitled to all initial and additional deposit funds provided for in Section 4, whether or not buyer has paid the same as liquidated damages, and both parties shall be relieved of further liability under this agreement. So what that term means, this is a very important term in contracts to look out for, and why I'm really glad it's in our contract here, is that it limits both parties' liability in this contract, right? The financial consequence of defaulting on this contract, it limits it to the amount of the deposit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not any more than that.
Not anymore. So if you put $1,000 as your earnest money deposit,
that's really all you lost.
The ceiling of financial consequence, the limit of damages is $1,000, whatever you have in that in your contract. So they cannot pursue you for $100,000, right? So that's why it's really important to have in there. Otherwise, they could come after you for as much as they want, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can sue anyone for anything in America. So,
well, that's really good. This really does cover everything. I mean, that's like the third thing now I didn't even think about that I need to be covered for. You know, 'cause there's so many legal holes that I feel like beginner wholesalers don't really think of, but this kind of has the catch-all. Realistically,
for sure,
all the bad things that could happen,
and that's why that's why we're taking the time to go through it. Because if you're a beginner wholesaler, or even if you're just looking for a new wholesale contract, having one as strong as this is going to protect you, but also understanding what's in it is going to allow you to feel comfortable and confident when you're in these situations, when you're down to the wire and you're trying to wholesale this deal on the last day of the inspection. You want to know with confidence that you're protected, because I see a lot of newer wholesalers that get worried, on the first day of the inspection, they have a week left and they're freaking out because they don't have a buyer yet. So it's really helpful to know what your potential risk is, which is what paragraph 14 buyer default is all about. The last sentence there just says if there's any legal action brought forth as part of this agreement, then the prevailing party shall be entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. So you would just get reimbursed for any attorney's fees if you're the party that basically wins any kind of legal action, any kind of lawsuit as part of this. 15 is just risk of loss damage. So it's basically, again, going back to if there's any damage to the property, if there's any loss on the property, right? If there's a fire, for example, during the contract period, that if the buyer didn't cause that damage, of course, right? That the seller is responsible for that, right? They still own the property, so it's not the buyer's fault. If the damage exceeds $5,000, then the buyer shall have the option to receive any insurance payment on account of said damage and take title, or rescind the agreement and receive back all the deposit money paid. So again, this is kind of like a contingency in a way, basically saying if there is any damage or loss on the property, that it gives the buyer the right to cancel, to walk away, or potentially continue to move forward and receive any insurance proceeds as a result to help remediate any of that damage. So again, very, very rare that this would actually come into play, but it's just, again, more protection for buyers, more protection for wholesalers in these contracts that we want to have in here to protect our interests, right? So 16, not super important. If you're buying a condo or if you're in an HOA, that's what a common interest community really means. When there's another governing body organizing the neighborhood, then it just says the seller will deliver the appropriate documents according to the local statutes and customs. So some HOAs require them to get involved in the transaction and to approve of sales and things like that. So it just has the seller comply with any local customs and rules. Cool. Well, we are getting close to being done, but we're almost there. So 17 is listing broker. So in the case that this is listed with a listing broker, it might be a pocket listing, it might be on the MLS, then you would simply disclose who that listing broker is, what their phone number is, and then if there's dual agency, right? If the listing broker is representing both seller and buyer, you can simply just check that box. And if there is a cooperating broker, which that just means if there's a broker representing you as the buyer, then you would just put their information here as well. Again, usually you're working directly with the seller on a contract like this, but if there are agents involved, we love working with real estate agents. They have access to a lot of great deals, and so we want to just make sure that they're listed on these contracts as well.
Right.
18 is mandatory seller disclosures. So every state has different local disclosures involved in real estate transactions. So this just states that the seller shall deliver to the buyer within time specified by statute, so in accordance with local laws, within 7 days of the acceptance of the offer. So a lot of times sellers, they're required to provide disclosure reports, basically stating if there's any deficiencies with the properties, any recent repairs made, any reoccurring problems or issues that they're aware about. They're required to disclose these things to the buyer. They can't just, throw some dirt on it and pretend like it doesn't exist, right? They've got to disclose things to the buyers just as it applies to local laws. So this is a big part of real estate, is disclosures from sellers to buyers. So this just requires that in accordance with local laws, the seller shall provide it to the buyer. And if the seller fails to deliver those disclosures, then the buyer has some protections as well. 19, equal housing rights. There's a lot of equal fair housing rights all over the nation. And this just basically saying that it's subject to any local or national laws about, fair housing laws, equal housing rights. So again, just another disclosure that we wanted to put in here. 20 is for any additional addenda and advisories. So it's just a space that if you had any additional addenda or advisories, you can just list them here. So then they would become an attachment. They would become part of this agreement as well. So you can just state them here. For example, if the seller is a trust, a lot of times they have to disclose that the seller is a trust, or if it's an entity, there may be some additional addenda to specify who's behind that entity or who's behind the trust. So again, just some things that you can add here. We just kind of left this open so you can add things as well. 21, additional terms and conditions. It's always good to have this section in your contract in case there are things that aren't specifically addressed in this contract. Terms that you're negotiating with the seller. For example, the buyer might offer to pay for moving costs for the seller, maybe outside of escrow, to help with the move, to really facilitate the sale and really solve the seller's needs, solve the seller's problems, and help them with this big decision in their lives. So you can add additional terms, really just a blank section, whatever you like. Of course, it's always good to get an attorney or someone experienced involved when you're ever making additions.
Your own.
Yes, exactly. So
Tim said he would give me his car. Oops.
Yep. And then, of course, there's initials for both parties on every page. And really the rest is just talking about, notices and how, emails or fax might be, acceptable, as well as, how you're going to communicate between both parties. A complete agreement just simply means that this is the entire agreement. Whatever we talked about verbally does not apply. This is the entire agreement, and everything in here is the full, contract between the parties. 24 is about notice. So it's just saying that notices shall be in writing between the two parties. And, that's pretty much what that says here. 25, disclosures and contract provisions. Seller acknowledges that the buyer has the right to market the property and or contractual interest in the property in any way before closing. Seller understands upon signing this agreement that buyer will possess a contractual interest in the property. So this is a very important contractual disclosure for wholesaling. This is why one of the reasons why this is a great wholesaling contract that we want people to use, we want people to review as a template, because this allows the wholesaler, this allows the buyer to now market the property or the contract to then find that end buyer. So this is a disclosure letting the seller know that yes, we are wholesaling. Yes, we have the right to do so. Maybe we will buy the property, right? It's entirely possible, but this just gives the buyer the right, the flexibility to now, market the property, market the contract prior to closing. And the seller's agreeing to it here. 26 is short sale. So if this is a short sale, then this is basically just a disclosure here for that. 27, it's always important if you, Tim, as a buyer, if you're a licensed realtor, you've got to disclose that. If anyone's using this contract who is a licensed real estate agent, you would want to disclose that as well. So this is just an opportunity to do so. If no licenses are at play, then nothing is needed in this section. And then 28 is just an acknowledgement that both parties have the power and ability to enter the agreement. They've read and understand the agreement and voluntarily accept the duties and obligations set forth herein. Buyer shall deliver a copy of this agreement to the seller within 7 days. So again, just another acknowledgement. And then finally, time to accept. When you're presenting the offer to the seller, this acts as a deadline. So it says, hey, I'm giving you this offer today. There's a timeline to where I might pull the offer, right? We're looking at 10 other houses right now to purchase, and I need to commit my capital to a certain number of these. I might be buying 5 before the end of the month, so I need to know if we're committed by this certain date. So puts a little bit of pressure, but also just allows this offer to have an expiration date so that it's not just out there forever. So usually you want to put 48, 72 hours. You might put as much as maybe 5 days to a week. So at least there's a timeline so the seller doesn't just forget about it and pretend like they can hold this in hand, forever and go out and shop a bunch of other offers. And then finally, signatures, extremely important. This contract is not valid without signatures, so make sure you get all of the seller's signatures on the lines here as well as the date. So if there's multiple parties, again, multiple sellers involved, you want all of their signatures here, or else you might have a problem actually closing this deal, as well as your own signature. And again, I'll remind you that there are initials pages on every single page. There's initial blocks on every page at the bottom. So go ahead and initial all of them. And once you've completed that, you now have an executed purchase and sale agreement.